Hello everyone and welcome to our second Reluctant Readers session with a great panel of guests sharing more of their ideas to motivate and inspire the reluctant reader. We have our very own writer-in-residence, Christina Longden. Hi, Chris.
Hi, everyone. I'm looking at my phone.
Okay, and we've got Linda, a librarian for Kirklees Libraries. Morning, Linda. And we've also got Olivia.
Hello.
Olivia.
Hi.
And Dinah.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Who are also librarians for Kirklees Libraries. So, as always, please send in your questions on the live feed on YouTube and Facebook, and we will try to answer as many as we can during the session. So, like last time, we thought we would start by looking at our favourite books from childhood or books that our children have enjoyed. So, we'll start off with Olivia. Shall we start off with?
Right, I've been a bit greedy because I'm quite indecisive. So Nicholas managed to source one copy of one of my favourite books, was Stig of the Dump, which is about a little boy and his sister, and they go to stay with their grandma. And when they're exploring around where she lives, they find a quarry, and there's a caveman living in the quarry, and they have all sorts of adventures with him. And I won't spoil it for those of you that haven't read it, but it's an amazing book. And I've just recently reread it, and my son's read it, my eldest, and he loves it too. So it's great to be able to pass that on and share ones that I loved. And I've just got to mention this Flower Fairies of the Trees. I don't know if anyone remembers this one. Sister Mary Barker. It's just got these beautiful illustrations and little poems all about the different fairies.
Lovely.
Lovely.
I have got loads of others. I'll restrain myself and stick to
those. Thanks, Olivia. Dinah, have you got?
Oh, hi. Yes. Oh, gosh. A bit like Olivia. So many as a child that I loved. I was a really, really avid reader. But my favourite books were The Famous Five, Mallory Towers and Secret Seven. Why? Because I was obsessed with the shed. I still am obsessed with getting a shed. I must have asked my mum and dad every day, can we get a shed, Mum? So I'm still waiting for my own secret shed where I can have a password. I think my password would be silly sausage or something, something like that. I also went like picnics, and Secret Seven, they used to have lots of picnics with jam sandwiches. And I remember as a kid getting my own blanket out and making my own little picnics and homemade lemonade. And also Bossy Peter, Children in Charge. I loved the Secret Seven stories. My son's 19. He loved, his favourite stories was the Gruffalo. Absolutely loved the Julia Donaldson series and the Smartest Giant and all those. And we loved going on a bear hunt. We'd always go on our own bear hunt. Those sound effects, trudging through the mud. But yeah,
Lovely.
Those are my favourite books.
Thanks, Dinah. That's lovely. Linda?
Yes, I can't hold up a copy of what I would say, but the only thing I ever remember reading as a child was the Jackie comic. And then later, I found out that the person behind the Jackie comic is Jackie Wilson.
Really?
You see, you didn't know that, did you?
No.
and that's about the only thing that I remember reading. I didn't read as a child. I wasn't encouraged to read as a child. We didn't have books in the house, so it's just the difference between the girls there so excited about their books. The boys had books. My boys had books. Each week we went to the supermarket. We used to buy a new one of the Mr. Men. We didn't have the Little Misses, but we had Mr. Men. So a trip to the supermarket, the treat for the kids was to bring home a new. And I've still got the collection upstairs, which I could have brought down, but I forgot. Yeah, the Jackie comic I would remember.
Lovely. Chris, what about you?
I've been greedy. I've got so many, and I'll talk about my daughter shortly, but one of the reasons I think she's a big reader now is because so my message is hoard books to everybody. This is my first one. Now, a lot of people that know me quite well know that I am not a poet, and I've never been one to pick up books of poetry and read them, I'm sad to say. But this was from my childhood, which is the tall book of make-believe. Very tall, as you can see. And I just checked, and I'm not this old actually, but it was 12 shillings and sixpence. And I believe one of my parents' friends gave me this book. And what I loved about it is it's a mixture of, the illustrations are just stunning. And there's little poems in it, like, I don't know if any of you remember The Land of Counterpane. That was one of the poems that I remember very much from my childhood, and the sugar plum tree with the calico whatever and the ginger cat. Yeah, brilliant. I love that one, but this is the one again which I've kept. I've got every single copy of every single Calvin and Hobbes ever. So high literary stuff, this, folks, but actually this is one of the cleverest things ever written. Ask anybody that knows about comics and graphic novels and they will go, Calvin and Hobbes. I think that the NHS should have this on prescription, because this will help people who are suffering from depression. So anybody who's really down at the moment, I'm serious about this. This is one of the funniest, cleverest, most heartwarming books ever written. This particular one is Attack of the Deranged Mutant Killer Monster Snowgoons, and Calvin was this fantastic, precocious but snotty, bratty, but amazingly clever kid who does dreadfully at school, and he has a stuffed toy cat who's actually a tiger. Parents are around, and it's just, we sit there, whatever your age, this is a book that appeals to everybody. So try and get hold of a Calvin and Hobbes book for somebody for Christmas, and you'll make them really happy, and you might get them into reading, which is what's happened with my daughter in particular, thanks to Calvin.
I'm going to write that one down. I'm going to write that one down.
Yeah. My choice was ones that my kids really loved when they were little. They were all the Jack Tickle books. So, I don't know if you can see, The Very Clever Crocodile, The Very Busy Bee, and The Very Bouncy Bear. And I just love them because they're beautiful.
Wow.
Really lovely. My kids just absolutely love these.
And did they never rip those things out? Were they good children and looked after?
Oh, they did try. But I use these for story times in libraries as well quite often, because they're just really good, good with the kids as well. Right, lovely. Okay, so I think we're going to start off with Chris, and we've got presentations. So let's just.
And just a reminder for those who are interested in particular in book tips from us, on the Writer in Residence page on the Kirklees Library's website, you'll find a list of all our tips that have got people reading whatever your age. So please have a look at those afterwards if you want some more book ideas. I'm sure we'll come up with book ideas as we're talking. But I'm just going to spend a few minutes now kind of recapping on how to get children reading, or how to become a better reader yourself if you're an adult and you struggle with reading. Linda's going to take over after me, and she's going to explain her own journey in life, which is extremely interesting and really, I hate the word inspiring, but it's dead inspiring. So just bear with me whilst I rattle through some of the more, I think, important points and a little bit of advice. So ideas for kids and adults. Next slide, please. And I will have a little chat now about the thing that Linda just alluded to before, really. These are all important points. Why be great at reading? The first thing is, you can help. This is for children in particular. If you're trying to persuade your kids why reading matters, when you grow up and you become an adult, you will have a family, usually, to look after, and you'll be able to help and support them better. You'll be able to bring more income into the family. You won't understand what's going on in the news. You can't read newspapers if you're not good at reading. Even driving, you have to be able to read to be able to drive. In most countries in the world, it's really important. Again, thinking about looking after the people around you that you care for. Fraud is a massive problem, particularly in our country at the moment, with all kinds of bogus people about trying to rip you off. If you're not good at reading, then you can't help your family, you can't protect them from unscrupulous people. Similar in relationships, people who are often trapped in relationships where their independence is taken away from them. It's even harder if you can't read and get yourself out of the mess that you might be in. Something else as well that is quite important is the money. Now, obviously, the more money you earn in the world, the more freedom that you have. If you can read, and if you've got qualifications in particular, you can help yourself get a job that might pay you more and that might make you happier in life. Obviously, we all know that money isn't everything, but it's a great thing to be able to give your child, is that chance to actually access a job where they might earn a little bit more income to keep themselves safe in the world. Something else as well that I will mention is the gender gap, and we might talk about this a little bit later on, but there's a study of 1 in 7 of the OECD countries, which are the richest countries in the world. 1 in 7 of these countries that we all think are wonderful and have a money have a massive gap between boys and girls, and boys on average are 9 months behind girls in 1 in 7 of these countries with their reading and with their literacy. So helping lads in particular is a huge issue, and something that we try and focus on when we're doing these talks and this kind of work. And I've got the word prison down there. This is because I still do stuff with prisoners, and one of the things, if you speak to anybody that works in prison, the one common issue that they have when somebody comes into prison is the fact that they have low literacy levels. It's not true of all prisoners, but the vast majority have low literacy levels, and many of them can't read. Now, ironically, having worked with people in prison, their literacy skills can be improved massively by being in prison, partly because sometimes they'll have access to an educational program. But as with me, I write a lot of letters to prisoners, and I've seen that the literacy levels improve just because they've got that time to focus on improving that part. So again, that's a sad story, and I'm sure that won't affect you or your children, but it is something to be really aware of. Let's focus on literacy. Let's get people out of prisons. Let's make sure they've got better life chances so they don't have to rely on crime to generate income for the families. Okay, next slide, please. Now, some of the reasons, this is my showy off bit. I love bookshelves. This is another great reason to read, which means you can have shelves full of books. So the shelf on the right, that's my daughter. My daughter is dyslexic, but these are her precious books. These are her most favorite ones, and you can't touch these. If you come to my house, they're everywhere. They're in massive piles all around the house, but I don't care because I think they're beautiful. I think they're better than any kind of wallpaper, and they're colourful. And you can, if you're a bit obsessive, you can order them. Mine are in certain order, not alphabetical. I won't bore you with what order they're in, but yeah, bookshelves, fantastic. Make your house look gorgeous, and it makes you look like you're slightly clever, even if you don't particularly feel it. Next slide, please. Okay, why won't people read? A number of reasons here, and Linda just alluded to the first one. A lot of it's about family habits. So if you grow up in a family where your parents don't read, odds are you're not going to be a big reader. I was really lucky because I consider myself to be lucky because my dad wasn't a big reader and my mum is, so I kind of seen both side of it. My mum was, her favorite thing still is to read, and I picked up that habit off her. And just to sit and talk about a story, and she does that now with her granddaughter. Oh, that was fantastic, that was wonderful. It really does determine, even from the leisure side of things, it determines the attitude to a book that is presented to a child once they're in the classroom, what their family's attitude is towards reading. And if all they ever hear is, well, we don't do books, that's not really us, that's not going to help a child's attitude within the classroom. The other thing as well, another factor that affects a child's attitude to reading is their personality. And I think we often forget this as well. We think, well, they seem reasonably bright, why won't they read? We all have different personalities. Some of us are more impatient, some of us are more physical, some of us are born with physical impairments, and we have different skills. We'll talk a little bit about dyslexia later on. And also we have different learning styles. So to present a child with, for example, a famous 5 book, one child might go, wow, fantastic, I'm straight into that. Another one will need a lot more help gearing them up to get into that book. On my last slide, there's a good website you can go to which will help you determine your learning style and your child's learning style with regards to reading. So it might make a bit of sense to you if you have a little look at that. It might reveal stuff for you that you're never really aware of. Timing is important. Again, I just alluded to that. The fact is, when you present a child with a book, sometimes in a classroom, kids are there's not enough quiet time for them to be able to read or to focus. The same at home. You've got to make sure that you're in the right environment to present a child with a book. And a lot of people I've spoken to during the last few months who are avid book readers have found it really difficult to read. And I'm one of them. I've been doing audiobooks a lot because I've just found it very hard for my mind to settle in the right way that I need to be able to enjoy a book, partly because of all the mental stuff that's going on for everybody during lockdown. Scaffolding is one of my favourite words. Until a child is 16, they are still, especially if they're a reluctant reader, not instantly going to be able to pick up a book that you think is good for them. So to help them, give them that support. It might be different with a 16-year-old than it would be with a 6-year-old, but think about, what can I do to help somebody sit and be quiet, and what kind of story would they like? One of the huge problems that we have with boys from the age of 13 and 14 in particular is it's not cool. It might be the same with some girls, but it does tend to be a male thing. At this age, all the teachers will tell you they really struggle getting lads into books. And a lot of it is because there's this image thing of it's not cool being into books. And I would say it's super cool being into books, but we need to work harder on that. I think getting people to overcome their attitudes towards what is cool and what isn't cool. It's hard when you're a teenager. Book quality is something that I can talk about forever. Having friends in the publishing industry who, there's a huge amount of books out there, too much sometimes, and they're not all of brilliant quality. Often it's if you follow a trend. So, for example, do a book on little wizards, you'll suddenly find there's 10 or 20 books on wizards, or 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 books out this year on fairies, because it's a trend. Doesn't mean it's a great book. So if your daughter or your son likes a particular book about, say, wizards, doesn't mean that they'll like all books about wizards. So it's hit and miss. Never give up on a child, and never presume that they liked a book about this specific thing that they'll like another book about it. It's all about the storytelling skills of the author. Stereotypes as well. There are often a huge number of stereotypes, particularly, again, girls and boys, the whole gender thing, that they suffer with this. Girls, my daughter said, came home from school, if they give me one more book about fairies. She hated fairies. And my son, he's not into football at all, but all he was ever seemed to be given was books about football. So we had to work hard to counter some of the stereotypes. And children, inevitably, particularly, from a different racial background, from the white mainstream society, they want to see stories and characters that reflect their backgrounds and their experiences and their relatives. And we're still not great at that in this country, in the publishing industry. It's getting a bit better. And genre as well. Children, I think, as well, are always told that they should like fiction. So the bookshelves in a school might predominantly be fiction. A lot of kids love non-fiction, and they're not given the chance to explore that. So as a parent, maybe that's something you can think about a bit more. Mass media assumptions as well. Kids love Disney films in general. They love Disney films. They don't necessarily translate to a good book. So if your child loves Disney films, for example, don't presume that they will then start reading because you've bought them a Finding Nemo book, because they're not really that great. They don't work well in the traditional storytelling in a book format. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, schools. Now, this is a huge, important thing for us all to remember. Schools are only a small part of the influence that we can have on our children's reading capability. I'm saying Linda there. Nicola, can I have the other side of the slide on that, please? I don't know why it's only brought up one half. Just as a reminder, those of you that have got kids will know this. Those of you that haven't, there's various testing scenarios in schools, and it usually begins in the first year of primary, and it's all about phonics screening. Is a child picking up their phonics and their reading to a good standard? They're tested again in year 2 and in year 6 and in Key Stage 4, which is the GCSE. So these tests are there to try and close that gap if a child's struggling or isn't at the point where they're meant to be. But you need to remember, at the absolute most, teachers can only give 3 to 5 hours per week on reading in a classroom. That is not a lot of time, particularly if a child needs extra help to settle and to calm down and to get into the reading. And again, like I said earlier, it's about the child's learning style. My children have always struggled to settle and to focus specifically on reading within a classroom environment, because they're really into things a bit like me. They're quite zippy and they're quite active, and it's hard for them to come down from chatting to somebody to focus. And that's something that you can do at home if you can provide the right home environment for them. Don't forget as well, teachers, bless them, have got 30 odd kids usually to deal with. So they're not going to particularly have the time, even if they've got a couple of teaching assistants with them, to focus on your child and to give your child the time that your child needs. We can talk about dyslexia testing later on if people want to. I won't go into that right now. But again, schools just don't have the budgets for this. So, you know, so many parents say to me, well, my child needs testing for dyslexia. The budgets, really, they're not there. It's very difficult, and they have to have an absolutely obvious issue before they can access that. And most kids don't, and most kids can't. And a lot of these impairments, I don't like that word, but a lot of these issues that we have are not on the surface. They're for you to try and extrapolate and to find more out about as a parent. The thing that all teachers will tell you they suffer from is, how do I get kids off screens? Yes, you can read on screens, and we'll promote that, you know, as much as we can, because a lot of people love reading on screens and love reading ebooks. But teachers still struggle because kids are so now used to screens, it's hard to get them into the book environment if they don't have that at home. Many schools now don't have school libraries. Some of them do. Fantastic. And that is a wonderful thing. If a school has a library, please get your kids to make the most of it. But even if they do have a school library, or even if they do have a bookshelf in the corner of the classroom, there often isn't enough time for a child to explore that bookcase with an adult to try and find out. Both my kids still need help when we go into a library to find the right bit and the right kind of stories. So to dump a child in a library or near a bookshelf and say, oh, I don't know what's wrong with you, why aren't you reading? There's some great books there. They need help. They need that scaffolding. As I said before, family life and attitude. A child can very much be just given up on books by the age of 8 if they haven't been encouraged from being very small to get into reading. And I've said before, boys from year 8, you know, they need extra help in particular. So what I would say is, please, if your child is struggling at school, you might be aggrieved with the school, you might be aggrieved with the teachers, but they have such a hard task with this. And I've never met a teacher who doesn't absolutely love books and love reading, want kids to do best, and kids want to do best as well. So this is very much about you and about what you can give it as a parent. And the one thing that is often left out of this equation when we're talking about helping kids is the libraries. You know, they are the unsung heroes. These are why you pay your council tax, people. So please use them and get the most out of them. Okay, next slide. Nicola's desperate to keep it with me here. Sorry, Nicola. I'll just briefly have a little touch on dyslexia and technical reading issues. Now, the problem that we have when we talk about a reading impairment or a reading issue is usually to do with how a child or an adult recognizes and manipulates the phonemes. It's their ability to do that. And English-speaking countries, we are now, if we were in Finland, or if we were in Greece, for example, where they have a very transparent code with their language and a very synthetic phonics, unlike English, which is completely inconsistent and completely all over the place, dyslexia just isn't an issue in these countries. A lot of this is to do with languages such as the English language, which are beautifully rich and full of historic tradition. But if you don't have that ability, if you're not born with that ability to decode in this particular way, you will struggle in the English language. So you do need a parent that's recognizing that to begin with. So, like I say, it's common in English, but I think proving it myself with my own daughter who was born with this dyslexic tendency. It can be overcome if you put some time and effort into it and you're committed and you don't give up and you don't say, well, my daughter's dyslexic, she doesn't do books. No, absolutely any child can do books. They just might need a little bit of imaginative help from the parents. So what I'm saying is the schools will often give more intervention as phonics lesson. If they identify and they agree with you that there's an issue here with this child, they'll say, we're going to give them more phonics lesson. And you'll go, oh, thank God, they're going to sort it out. And they're not. They're going to help your child to figure out a certain way of looking at phonics and breaking down reading and perhaps remembering the spelling, which is a huge issue and will always be a big issue with most people who are dyslexic, but it won't help the dyslexic to learn to love books or to learn to love reading or to find their own way through it. So they do need early intervention, like I said, very inventive ideas from school and from parents. Two wonderful quotes here that I love. The intellectual crippling of children is caused by faulty instruction, not by faulty children. And that's the thing we always need to say to our children. It's not your fault. You know, there's nothing wrong with you. You've got a beautiful mind and it works quite differently to mine. My daughter, for example, she's got what I would say is a code cracking mind. And I think that's the dyslexic bit of her brain is she would be a fantastic detective. She's an investigator. She's constantly looking for patterns, you know, and she won't find them in the English language a lot of the time, but she's got a mind that's racing ahead. And a lot of dyslexics, I'll say this time and time again, have got a higher average IQ than the general population. and they're constantly trying to crack a different code than the rest of us in the English language aren't able to do. And the failure to read is to do with the nature of the teaching rather than the nature of the child. So please just keep reinforcing this with your child. You know, you are going to read, you're going to be a brilliant reader. And the same for you as adults now who are saying, well, I'm not a reader, my spelling's rubbish. This is not about you. This is about a society that hasn't helped you as a child. And you can absolutely turn that around now. Linda will tell you about that in a minute. Okay, next slide, please, Nicola. So these are the sites. If you go back to watch again on YouTube or on Facebook for this video, and if you haven't got time to do it now, just get a photo of these sites because they're brilliant. There's two there that I've highlighted in red. There's the assessment on learning style, which might help you, might help your child to figure out what's my learning style when it comes to reading. Might really be something of use that you can look at. And then there's the book finder tool as well. As I said before, we've already got some lists up there of our own personal choices. That if your child needs a little bit of help of finding the books that might work for them, there's a great tool on there which the Book Trust have produced. And again, we've got another video. We did Reluctant Readers session once, which you can watch if you haven't already seen that on the Kirklees YouTube channel. So that's me for now. That's the evangelical bit at the beginning about reading. And now over to Linda, who's going to tell us a little bit about her story in life with reading and books. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris. Brilliant.
Chris has told us, touched on quite a few of the bits that I'm going to talk about as well. So basically, I discovered that I had dyslexic syndrome when I was 47, and it's had such an amazing effect on my life ever since. It kind of made sense of everything. I'd always been so bright but struggled to read and had to concentrate so hard to make sense of the words. Many famous people are dyslexic. Albert Einstein, Pablo Picasso, Tom Cruise, Richard Branson, Steven Spielberg, Jennifer Aniston, Orlando Bloom, Cher, Paloma Faith, Whoopi Goldberg, Lewis Hamilton, Anthony Hopkins, Keira Knightley, Paul Oakenfold, Jamie Oliver, even Benjamin Zephaniah, who was a fantastic poet. So their genius didn't occur despite dyslexia. Their genius occurred because of dyslexia. Dyslexics utilise their brain's ability to alter and create perception, and that's probably the primary ability that we've got. We are highly aware of our environment. We're curious, we're more curious than average, and we think mainly in pictures, not in words. We're highly intuitive and perceptive, and we think and perceive multidimensionally using all our senses. We can experience thought as reality, and we have very vivid imaginations. Having dyslexia won't make every dyslexic a genius, but it is good for our self-esteem to know that our minds work in exactly the same way as the minds of great geniuses. It's also important, for us to know that having a problem with reading, writing, spelling, and maths doesn't mean that we're stupid. The same mental functions that produce a genius can produce those problems. So basically, if your child has dyslexia, congratulations, because you've got a very clever child there. Now, I want to try and explain a little bit about how we see words so that hopefully you will be able to see through your child's eyes if your child is dyslexic and can't read. Basically, human beings think in two different ways: verbal conceptualization and non-verbal conceptualization. The first means thinking of the sound of the words, and the second means thinking with the mental picture of the words. People think in both verbal and non-verbal modes, but as humans, we tend to specialize. And during the period when the learning disability aspect of dyslexia is formed, which is between 3 and 13, the potential dyslexic must be primarily a non-verbal thinker, a person who thinks in pictures. To understand this, we must look at language. When we use verbal conceptualization, we're thinking of the sounds of the words. That's phonics, that's what Chris was talking about. But when we think, so listening to a sentence mentally, which is what the verbal conceptualization person would do, we can listen to that sentence mentally, and that will aid understanding, because usually symbols, letters, words don't all occur in the sequence that makes the meaning of the sentence unfold as it's being read. For example, you can't tell whether an English sentence is a statement or a question until you get to the end and discover whether it's followed by a full stop or a question mark. Can you? If we use nonverbal conceptualization like me, we're thinking of the meaning of the language by forming mental pictures of the concepts and the ideas. So for me, these pictures are not only visual, they're more like three-dimensional, multisensory films. They change and evolve as a sentence is read. So the process is many times faster than verbal conceptualization, which I obviously find amazing, but it does present a lot of problems because some parts of the language are easier to picture as concepts and ideas than others. Dyslexics do not hear what they are reading unless they're reading out loud. Early readers often start out like this, but they continue to read and then they start using the sounds of the words to convey the meaning. And reading becomes like an unconscious event, kind of like learning to drive and then just driving. I cannot skim read a document. I read everything out loud in my head, which is why it takes so long. I'm composing a mental picture and I'm adding the meaning or the image of the meaning of each new word as I encounter it. When I read words that describe a real thing, I don't have a problem. The word elephant looks like an elephant, pencil, school, book, home. And I can also think in verbs like fly, sleep, view, because I've seen and experienced the actions that those words describe. Words that can't be pictured, however, are a different thing. What does a look like? What does and look like? What does the look like? The only picture that I can form from those words is the shape of the letters themselves. If I could think using verbal conceptualization, there would be no problem. I would know how they sound. I would create a picture of the meaning of the sentence only after I've completed reading the sentence. But because I think in nonverbal conceptualization, the pictures of the sentence that I'm reading is evolving as I read. The development of the picture being formed by the sentence is stopped each time the meaning of an unknown word cannot be incorporated into the overall picture. I end up with a series of unrelated pictures with blank spots in between. As a child, each time this happened to me, I would experience a feeling of confusion. So I'd concentrate really, really hard. Eventually, I'd reach a threshold of confusion. I had concentrated so hard that I was disoriented, that I felt dizzy, that I actually felt physically sick. I didn't understand what I'd read. So what do I do then? Should I read it again? What would have changed? We think of concentrating as a positive thing to do, but when I have to concentrate so hard in order to read, it's like being in an hypnotic state. And this adds to the difficulty of the understanding of the material that I've read, as well as the time that's required to concentrate and comprehend the words that I've read. As an adult, reading learned works for university and later reading reports for work, I would reread documents repeatedly, often looking up words in a dictionary for a sample sentence or a phrase, using with each of the definitions just to try and understand that one word. And sometimes I wouldn't even get it then, so I'd just abandon it and move on. There are more than 200 English words that cause problems for me. They're in my speaking vocabulary, but I cannot form a mental picture of these words, and that means that there are more than 200 words in speech that I can't even think. And trigger words have abstract meanings, so often they have several meanings, and these words trip me up because they don't represent any visual objects or any actions. I don't understand those words. These are the words that occur most frequently in everyday speech and everyday reading. So just think how your child feels when they look at those words. Think of the panic, think of the concentration. So how do I read? I must read in silence. Then I can form pictures of the words without the distraction of other pictures popping into my head from words around me. Because I'm so keenly aware of my environment, any noise around me when I'm trying to read creates frustration and panic because it's interfering with my pictures. I'm very easily distracted. All we dyslexics are curious. So whatever's going on, you start doing something, you start thinking something, and then something else just takes over, takes you away. I've got the attention span of a gnat, and I am extremely easily bored. Drives my boyfriend balmy. Consequently, I'm restless. I pick up a book to read, but it takes so long to read. It takes so much concentration that I'm either frustrated and agitated, or I simply feel exhausted. That's the hypnotic state, and I just fall asleep. When I do finally get a chance to read, such as this year when I was on holiday by the pool with peace and quiet and no tasks that had to be completed, no distractions, I read a whole book quite easily. I read best when I read well thought out, well imagined books so that I can employ my imagination and immerse myself. I read books that hook my curiosity because, as I said before, dyslexics are very curious about their environment and everything that's going on around them. So I want to know why and how. Books which do not have long convoluted sentences, long chapters, books that, I like books with visual imagery. I read children's books. I read non-fiction books. I know Chris said earlier that children will often read non-fiction because you can read just the piece that you need to get that information from. You're not overtaken by a whole book. Barrington Stokes publish books for dyslexic readers, and they have easy concepts, well-spaced outlines, well-spaced out words. They're in easy font and they're on off-white paper, all of which creates that calm environment that you need if you need to settle down so that you've got the patience, so that you don't get frustrated, so that you don't get restless. And that's how that non-verbal conceptualization person is thinking. So I recommend non-fiction books. Find a subject that your child is interested in or that you're interested in. Books of short stories, like there's a brilliant book that I like called The Science Fiction Omnibus, and that's all short stories. There are some quick reads books, and these are novels in abridged versions. Newspapers, magazine articles. For children, there's things like Match for football, National Geographic for kids, First News, The Week, which is a junior magazine, Adventure Book Max, which is a magazine, Coco Girl, the Pathfinder Club. Those are the STEM ones. And there's another one called How It Works, another magazine called How It Works. Now up here, we've got some banners, which are extremely long. So what I did when I was trying to find something that I could pass on to you was just to Google children's magazines. And these two sites came up. There's W.H. Smith's, which is the, obviously everybody knows W.H. Smith's, and that's magazines for kids and teens. And the other one that I found, which was a school reading list. And this is about magazines and newspapers as well. Because like I said right in the beginning, I read the Jackie magazine. Magazines are easy to read. Newspapers are easy to read. To be quite honest, I don't care what you're reading. Read the cornflake packet as long as you're reading. But help your child to read. Give them patience. That's the best gift you can give to your child, is give them patience. They will tell you what they see. They will tell you how they read. And you have to listen to them. I know that the girls afterwards are going to talk about some lovely tips for reading with your child, how to get them into a good environment, how to put them in a nice place, how to get them to relax. I read what Olivia's going to say, and Olivia's bit was marvellous. Now, I've got two other things here. One is this one, which is our digital magazine and newspapers. Now, this is Press Reader, and this is something that you can access with your library card and your PIN number. And you can access not only adult magazines, but children's magazines. So look out for that one. And the other one is, of course, our e-audio ebook collection. And that's the Libby app. And that is so that you can access the ebooks. Sometimes children read better from screens. It's a smaller area that they're reading from. So that could be good. Take that one off. And then I'll just go back to my notes for this last little bit. So, yeah, also recommend Press Reader and ebook. I know Alison gave you loads of titles last time at the first Reluctant Readers session, so go back and have a look at that. That's on our online Reader in Residence broadcast. And if you've missed that, you can catch up. And I don't know, have we got a Reader in Residence banner, Nicola? Can you find that one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There we go.
And I do have some recommendations. The book that I read on holiday was this one, which is Ross Mackenzie. You see, oops, that one. So we're back to front on here. Ross Mackenzie, the chapters are short. Each one tells you about a different character. It tells you where they live, how they live. And then as you read on, all these threads come together. And it's an engrossing tale of magic, slums, sewers, rats, old hags, witches, both ancient and seemingly young. Now, Ross was one of our Library Adventures Live authors, and that's how I got to meet him and how I got into his book. So do have a look at the Library Adventures Live website. Look at the Library Adventures live past broadcasts that we've done. Somebody else that I can recommend is Catherine Fisher. That's this one. That's a fabulous book. And if you look inside, I don't know if you can you see the, you see, can we see that? Yeah. What I'm trying to illustrate is that the lines are spaced out, the words are spaced out. A child will get a chance to concentrate on those words without them swimming around all over the place. This one is a Barrington Stokes one. And I don't know if you can see that the words are spaced out, the colour of the paper. And that again is another Catherine Fisher. And it's a short one as well. So it's only a nice thin one. Okay, lastly, this is a new author, Malice in Underland. And that's great to read as well. And again, nice, easily set out. Lots of nice pictures to space out the words out and give a child chance to concentrate on calming down and feeling confident to read. My life would have been so different if I'd read as a child, if I'd overcome it, if I'd known I was dyslexic younger. But now we've got better ways of understanding these things. So hopefully children won't get to this ripe old age like I am and still not be able to read properly. Thank you, Nicola.
Oh, thanks, Linda. That was really brilliant. Thank you. Okay, we've got Olivia next, librarian for Kirklees, who has lots of top tips for parents of reluctant readers, which she'd like to share with you today. Hi, Olivia.
Hiya. Hi. I just wanted to say those two sessions, they were amazing and they had all the sort of science and details, and I've learned a lot myself. Mine's going to be a bit more of a general session, but hopefully you're going to pick up some tips from it. So you have to excuse me, I've got lots of bits of paper I'm flapping about here. My first top tip, and I know a lot of these points have already been touched on, would be to read yourself. Children need to see that, as in Christina's house, that there are books in the house. They need to be surrounded by books. They need to see you reading. But, well, not just books. It can be newspapers, magazines. We're not trying to encourage too much screen time, but we have got our Libby app, our Overdrive app, so you can read books online. You can read newspapers online. But just have stuff around the house. Just make sure kids see you reading. That's one of my main top tips. The next one, which is tricky at the minute, but you can do it via Overdrive and the Libby app again, is to take them to the library and show them around and get them choosing books themselves. So whether they're choosing them online or they're choosing them in the library, it's just so important to give them the floor, give them the space to do that. If you get to a library and your children are sort of a bit phased, they don't know where things are, don't be afraid to ask the staff where things are. Obviously, again, once we're back to normal, you can talk about your interests and they can guide you to the right section. Now, I know Christina's mentioned that just because you like wizards, it doesn't mean that all the wizard books are going to be good for you. But at least if you've got them there, you can pick them out and the child can choose for themselves. They can have a go. If they start a book and it's not for them, it's not the end of the world, put it back, start another one. So I'd really think it's important to let them choose. Now, if they come back and they choose, if it's a 4-year-old and they've chosen the last Harry Potter book, obviously that's not going to be appropriate. But if they choose one and you think, well, perhaps it's a bit of a stretch, take it out anyway, but they maybe guide them towards one that you think is a little bit more appropriate for their age. Take them back, get them home with you. And then when you're reading, when you get home or that night, the one you think might be a little bit tricky, read it together. Just say that you'd really like to have this story too, and have it as a family book. Read along with your finger. My son used to love doing this with me. And then when he got to a word he recognised, he'd say, oh, I can read that. And he'd join in. And eventually he'd sort of settle down. We'd enjoy the story together. I'd read a bit, he'd read a bit. And then pick the book that they've chosen, or you've helped them to choose, that is more their level. And then they might have the confidence to read that one when they've read a bit of the other one with you. Now, lots of times you'll see older siblings. The older siblings are a blessing and a curse. You see them reading books and it's fantastic. You think, oh, that's great, I want to read. But sometimes it can make a child pick up a book. My son was desperate. I know they're not the most exciting books in the world, but my eldest son just whizzed through all the Beast Quest ones. And then my younger one, he was a bit disheartened because he picked one up and they're sort of aged 7 and he was 5. He'd only learned sort of a few words. And he was a little bit disheartened when he tried to read it and it was just far too difficult for him. Many of the books around today have got younger versions. He really loves pictures in a book as well. So again, it's not the best written book in the world, but reading this has meant he's been able to access the same books as his big brother. As you can see, it's quite a lot different from the older version. So there's fewer words, they're more spaced out, there's a lot more pictures. And there's a few books that do this. I know Famous 5, there's various Famous 5 ones that they've got the pictures in. It's a nice bridge between the picture books and a novel. So they do it. Far Away Tree. We read The Far Away Tree as a family book, and then my eldest son went on to read it himself. And my youngest again wanted to do it, but he gets a bit disheartened with himself when there aren't pictures. So these are great. They're basically like the first chapter has been made into a whole little mini novel with pictures. Now, what I've done with him is, because it does allow him to access the book, but it can still be a bit daunting. It's still a fairly thick book for a new reader. So what I've done is I've made sure, sorry, not in that one. This is the best one with the contents page. Make sure they know how to use a book. Sort of, you can empower them by showing them the contents page. So if they think, I want to read this book, but it's too long, show them the content. Show them that basically each chapter is like a little mini story. So this one is between pages 7 and 13. So we show them chapter 1. I say, look, chapter 1, it's only this much of the book. So we don't focus on the whole book. We focus on one chapter at a time. And my top tip for this, for making a book seem less phasing, it sounds simple, but get a bookmark. You can have a fancy bookmark, one of these clippy over the top bookmarks, or get them involved. Sorry, this is a bit scrappy. This was one of my son's Easter bookmarks. This is one he made at school every year when they start a new class. They make a bookmark and they all get it laminated. Get them to do this. It's a fun thing you could do. Everyone in the house can make their own bookmark. And then when they're reading, it shows them they don't have to read the whole thing at once. That's the bigger thing that used to put me off, and it still does if I come across a massive book. Then I just sort of remember I don't have to read it all at once. So get them a bookmark. Get them to break books down into chapters, and that should be a tip to sort of make them seem a little bit less phasing. Now, another thing. Now, this was something else that Christina mentioned with TV tie-ins. Again, some of them can be fantastic. Some of them, I mean, we read the we tried to read the Ninja Turtle series because my sons loved them. And the versions we had, and there might be good ones out there, but ours were just dire. And they used all sorts of made up words and names and long words, and they were written really badly. And it put him off reading for a little bit. So I had to sort of do a bit of work to get him back. But there are some good ones out there. So as a guardian, I'd get you to just have a flick through the books first and just see if they're written in English that the kid's actually going to be able to understand. But if you get the right ones, they can help. So my son loves nature and he loves explorers. So the Bear Grylls ones, he started off with these Bear Grylls Explorer books. There's all sorts of different adventures they have. And now as he's got older, there's a bit of progression. He's written the Jungle Book adventures as well. And so he's progressed onto these books for older readers as he's gone along. Similarly, with the Deadly 60, he loved that. Now, I quite like this one because it's quite a hard-going book. There's a lot of information in there. But because it's a non-fiction one, he could just find the little bit he wanted. And once he was actually a confident reader, but not necessarily wanting to read whole books, he could find the bit Find the bit he wanted in the contents and just read little bits at a time. Again, with that was another way I engaged him, actually, just reading bits of non-fiction. So for his 6th birthday, we got him this Ultimate Reptilopedia. He took it into school for World Book Day. 2 of his other friends ended up buying it because they all loved it so much. And we started off picking 2 animals a night. Him and his brother would pick 2 and we'd read them as a family. And then as he's got older, he's learned how to use the contents page, find the animal he wants to read and just go to that one. It's also quite empowering, teaching kids about how books work. So showing them the index, showing them another way to use books, showing them they can just find the particular animal they want. If they want to learn about a ball python, they can just do that. Show them how to do it. They don't have to read the whole thing. And the glossary. If you go and do a non-fiction book that's got a good glossary in it, they can learn all sorts of fantastic words that their friends won't know, and that really empowers them as well. Get them to have a look at that. Now, where did I get to? Yes, schools. Now, sometimes at school they might be enjoying a subject, but if you're not reading at home, one way to do it is to read some fiction based around the subject. So my son, just before lockdown, he studied the Romans, and then over lockdown, we studied the Greeks. So he recently read Maz Evans' Who Let the Gods Out? And that was fantastic because it's obviously fiction, but it's based around some of the characters and some of the gods that he had come to know and love through his studies. And so he really loved doing that. And it also helped inform his schoolwork as well. He also loved this one, The Mark of the Cyclops by Savio Piretta. So that's an ancient Greek mystery. So it's all just fiction, but it's based around history. And then when he went on to do Titanic, because he was interested in it at school, it was a great way to sneak in a bit of extra reading. So we listened to an ebook as well that was a survivor's story. So it was fictionalized, but it was based in fact. So that was a fantastic one. We read a made-up story, but based on some facts that might have happened. And then we had some non-fiction all about it as well. So linking into what they're doing in school can be great. And then his younger brother got in on the act, and he's been reading these Roman Brit books. He saw his older brother reading about the Romans. So luckily I was managed to find some younger books for him. And again, they're broken down into chapters. So we just do a chapter every few days. Another thing you can do to really bring the books to life is to act out bits of it, to have fun. Make sure when you're reading the books, do the silly voices and get engaged. Encourage your children to not just read the words, but really do the punctuation and the emphasis as well, because that makes the book come to life. For World Book Day, my son dressed up as one of the characters from Savio Piretta's Stone Age Boy. And he had such a lovely time. And he still likes to put this outfit on now. And he gets into character, and we think about other adventures that the character in the book might have had. So that's a way to sort of encourage them to get involved in the books. I would say read together as well. Make sure you have some time, maybe set aside at bedtime to anyone in the family. You can all sit around together and share the books. If you've got kids at different ages, it doesn't matter. We generally let my younger son pick a book, my older son pick a book, and then we have a joint book and we all read them together. And they get at different ages, they get different things from the books. Sometimes my older son will read a bit to the younger one. Sometimes the younger one's then empowered and wants to read a bit to the older one. It's just a really special time to have together at bedtime. And then my younger one will go to sleep and the older one will carry on reading into the night. Another thing to aid the reading, to encourage them, make them feel special. So they've got their own bookmark, you've made that with them. It comes to bedtime. Consider buying a reading lamp, especially if you've got different siblings occupying the same room. You can get fairly cheap ones that just sort of clip over the top of the book. Doing it is great. So if you've got kids that go to sleep at different times, they can all have ownership of their own reading. Also, it makes the reading quite special. It can make it exciting if all the lights are off and just your little reading lamp's on. It can make it really nice and cozy. But obviously, vision takes priority, so make sure they can actually see the book. But you can make it quite exciting. You can get under the covers and read. If you're not able to read yourself or you're not a confident reader, you can get an ebook. So you can actually listen to the ebook. So you can all sit there together. Don't just put it on and wander off. Put it on and sit there with them and listen to it. And you can talk about the book. And they'll know that you still love books, even though you might not be the most confident reader. We also, on our Libby and Overdrive, we've got a few were trying to buy more of the read-along books. So again, if you're not confident, you can get a read-along book, and it's got sort of, some of them have got those bouncing balls that follow the words along, so you can read with them. If you really, really haven't got the time, you have to work in the evening and you can't be with them, put an ebook on, but then talk to them about it the next morning. So ask them questions about it, ask them what's happening in the story. Maybe if you can listen to it later on at a different time, then you can share the same story together. But what a top tip would be to put a timer on it, because my kids go to sleep with the ebook on and then neither of them can remember where they've got to in the morning, which is a bit of a nightmare. And like I say, put the silly voices on, do movements, do dances if the book warrants it. Make sure you really get involved in the books. And another top tip would be to not push your kids. My kid goes to a lovely school, but they were very keen on homework, and he used to have 3 books a night, and 3 books a week. I don't think he had to read them, but it was strongly encouraged. And he really didn't like it. He begrudgingly read them. And then they changed their policy so that they took as many books as they wanted. But when they finished one, they started on the next one. There was no pressure to read a certain amount of books. And literally the day they did that, he read a book a night from then onwards, and he hasn't stopped since. So encourage them, but don't push them. Don't make them feel that there's pressure. So in my son, there's many kinds of reluctant readers. In my son's case, it was mainly the pressure and the expectation that hindered us from reading. So once that was taken away and he was free to read on his own terms, he read more than the school had ever asked him to read in the first place. So just get them to enjoy reading, make sure they see you reading, and just do it together. Make it as fun as you possibly can, and anything goes, basically. I think that was most of the top tips.
Fantastic. Thanks, Olivia. Brilliant. Some really good hints and tips there. Yeah. Okay, we've got Dinah next. Coming on screen. Hi, Dinah. Okay.
Hi. Wow, we've covered quite a lot of things there. Some of the things that I was going to cover. However, I just want to just quickly tell you about my son. James is 19 now, and as a little boy, I used to love to read to him, and he loved being read to. But as he got to about 4 or 5, he was really reluctant to read. I was buying him books that I thought he would like, but I was worried about him, and that he wouldn't read. School were concerned about him, so I encourage him to read by taking him to the bookshops himself and getting him to choose his own books. And being a boy, he was very much into the fun words of silly words around poops and all the silly words that boys say. And one of his favourite books that he really started getting into were the Horrid Henry books. They're really short, lots of pictures in them. And also Horrid Henry, Francesca Simon has written books that are fact books. So it wasn't just the stories that got him reading, it was facts, so silly facts about things that made him laugh. So I encourage humour when you're choosing books for children, especially like joke books. Encourage them to read jokes, to tell each other jokes. He'd enjoy making me laugh, and that was, again, gave him a sense of achievement, and he enjoyed making us all roll about laughing. I'll just read you a joke now, just because. In this joke book, it's linked with historical howlers. So if they're studying history at school, you've got books that have historical jokes. So, for instance, which queen couldn't stop drinking water? It was Elizabeth the Thirst. So things that are humorous got him reading. When he was about 5 or 6, he really got into football. He was football crazy. He would eat, sleep, drink. Football was just his passion. He used to kick a sock around in the kitchen. Football was his favourite thing. And we came across football books got him into reading about his favourite players. He wanted to be a football star. Short chapters about football players, Suarez. Oh my gosh, you know, he would read any book about a football player. So what I suggest to you, and hints for you, is find their interest, find the passion. It can be space, dinosaurs, fishing, it can be anything, but find their passion. And for James, it was football. Now he's reading biographies. He reads about Gerrard, Alex Ferguson, all his favourite football stars. That's James's passion. Annuals, don't forget annuals. They've got lots of facts in there, short sentences, quizzes, crosswords, word searches. All those things can help your child read and improve the literacy. We used to play Scrabble. We loved to make up words that didn't exist, silly words, but he'd also learn new words. And then sometimes from that, we'd make up stories. We'd take all the words that we had created in Scrabble, and we'd make stories. And the sense of getting more points when they're making the words was fun for him. So there's some fun games called Bananagrams. He's really enjoyed playing that. So it's not just about physical books. It can be games that they play that can encourage them to read. Factual books, again, were mentioned. So football facts and terrific trivia. Learning about the greatest goals, hat-trick heroes. Other things that James would read would be football programmes. When he used to go to the town match, Grandad would buy him a programme every week, and he'd read it from cover to cover. He might not be able to read every word, and if he couldn't read the word, he'd ask me because he wanted to know about that player. So football programmes, football newspapers, he'd get the Sunday newspaper and he'd be reading the results at the back. So these are the things, let them read what they want. Don't discourage anything. Now James reads books about football grounds. He doesn't read very much fiction, but I don't discourage him reading the factual books about all his favourite stadiums, deep facts about them. This is another one that he's into. Cut out the promo, but books about his favourite trainers. So anything that they're interested in. Another tip that I used with James was that he used to love listening to CDs in the car. We've got lots of audiobooks. He'd love listening to stories on journeys. They're taking in the words, they're learning the literacy, making up their own stories. So one top tip that I'd give to you is listen to CDs, audiobooks. Another top tip that I'd really like to signpost you to is websites of authors. So for instance, if your child's into a favourite author, check out their website. There's puzzles, there's interactive, downloadable resources. So all those are fun ways to encourage reading. The list is endless. Thank you.
Thanks, Dinah. That's absolutely brilliant. I'm going to get everybody back on screen now. There we go. There we are. Okay, because we've just got a couple of questions. And one's come up here. What do struggling readers need? What do we think?
Encouragement.
I think they need a parent that's not going to give up on them. And Linda talked about patience. And we live in a society now where we've all learned to be incredibly impatient and want stuff at the touch of a button. And this is the biggest problem that teachers have in the classrooms. They don't have the time. They probably have the patience. It's probably wearing thin at the end of the day. So, you know, whilst it is incredibly hard being a parent anyway, I think that the thing they need the most is a parent who isn't going to show frustration, who isn't going to show disappointment, who's just going to show absolute faith in them, and who will try, when you have the energy, to 1,000,001 ways to get that child reading. And I think we've just given 1,000,001 ways of doing it to people watching this. It's been fantastic.
Oh, lovely. Okay, and there's just a final one here. What can I do when my child only focuses on their weaknesses and shortcomings when it comes to reading? Oh, Linda, I think you're on mute. Linda.
Talk, Linda.
Being really good. I was being really good because I didn't make noises when other people were talking. When your child focuses on weaknesses and shortcomings, how do they know they've got weaknesses and shortcomings? Because somebody's told them.
Yeah.
What you need to do is build that child's self-esteem. Go back to all those people that are famous. If you go onto the internet and Google famous people with dyslexia, famous people with reading difficulties, you will find so many people that have aspired to such. I mean, for goodness sake, look at Richard Branson. Don't we all wish we got his money? Look at famous people like Benjamin Zephaniah. Nobody told him he couldn't read.
Yeah.
What you need is patience. What you need is your self-esteem feeding. You need confidence, because you can do it. Everybody can read. But if you look at those words, they start dancing around. You start struggling. I can't do this. I can't do that. Then you will fail. But nothing succeeds like success.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Linda. Lovely.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're sort of getting to the end of the session now. But I think Chris just wants to talk about next week's session.
Next week, next Thursday, 11 o'clock. I'm going to be talking about this amazing story that I had the privilege of writing, which is a family history story. If you're into your family history, please watch this. It's discovery made by my dad. Ended up writing 2 books about it. That's a story in itself. I can even show you these beautiful books. And we're going to give 3 of them away, actually, as a prize, aren't we, Nicola? The people that stick with it to the end, you get a chance. These are 2 of the books that I wrote, which you can get from Kirklees Libraries anyway. But these are the books I wrote about Robert Stanley, who was a northern working class man, became a mayor, rose above his station in life, and he ended up converting to Islam, which is just mind-blowing, back in the 1890s, and the family covered this up for 100 years. And so I'm going to talk about my books. I'm going to talk about his life. I'm going to perhaps encourage people who've got a fantastic family history story themselves to maybe think about doing something with it. It is Interfaith Week, so this is partly really talking about his journey in life. He was very interested in spiritual matters, but the thing, whether you have a faith or not, the thing that was particularly important that I want to talk about is he just looked for truth. And he started seeing that people were lying to him. And I think that's something for today. It's a story for today. So if you're interested in really unusual stories and in really interesting personalities whose histories have been completely covered up, mainly because they're working class and they thought for themselves, please join us next week.
Yep. So next Thursday, about 11 o'clock.
Brilliant.
Okay.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Can I just say before we go? If you haven't seen the Cosmere series on Lal, Christina, the one with your daughter Ruby and SM Wilson?
Yeah.
The Extinction Trials, watch it. It's brilliant because she talks about writing for her 2 boys who were reluctant readers, and the challenge that they gave her. So it's a cross between Lara Croft and Jurassic Park. It's the great stories. So
it's a good talk, isn't it? Yeah, it is. Thank you.
Yeah, no, wanted to just plug that.
Lovely. Okay, thanks to everybody. Thanks again.
Thanks everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nicola.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.